So today, I'm delighted that I have my friend Matthew Bishop with me today. Matthew is, amongst other things, an authority on philanthropy. He wrote a book on philanthropic capitalism, which was the notion of business leaders turning philanthropic at a time where no one else was really speaking or talking about it. It helped us understand what the trend was and what was coming and growing as a movement. Matthew, prior to that or during that time, was also a senior editor at The Economist magazine and latterly was at the Rockefeller Foundation as well. Matthew, welcome.
Good to be with you.
What I wanted to talk to you about today was the future of philanthropy, given that we're in this COVID situation, and what do you see? I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Well, I think philanthropy is at a crossroads because I think the COVID crisis has really drawn to our attention more graphically than ever before just how flawed our current systems are, that we have a system where there's a lot of inequality in all sorts of ways, and the rich are getting richer. I think even during this crisis, the latest research shows that the billionaires have become substantially wealthier whilst the rest of the world is really struggling. And so the question is, how are the rest of the world going to react to all this wealth? And how are the people who control the wealth going to use it? Are they going to use it on things that make them feel more prosperous, or are they going to actually do some good? And the sort of things that I wrote about in the book, Philanthropic Capitalism, we showed how philanthropy can, done well, be a very productive force for social innovation, for solving some of these systemic problems in society. But the reality is that it's often not been what it should be. It's not been playing that role well. And it's interesting, we may see, if there is a vaccine produced for COVID, that philanthropy has played a key role in that. Bill Gates it's been extraordinary, I think, over the years and now in leading philanthropists. But all these other social challenges, from race justice to fixing healthcare systems more generally, to looking after workers who we now are recognizing are playing essential roles in the system. Will philanthropy play the role it could play in finding lasting solutions? This is the challenge for philanthropists today, and the clock is ticking.
And so everyone talks about Bill Gates all the time, actually. Mm-hmm. And with regards to the COVID crisis, in terms of funding, vaccine research and everything else, who are the others that are doing good stuff at this time?
Well, I think Jeff Skoll, who was who's the first CEO of eBay, he's been worried about pandemics for at least a decade. He produced the film Contagion, which really showed what life would be like under a pandemic. He's been working closely with the Centre for Disease Control in Africa, for example, and with leading African businessmen like Strive Miasoa to try and sort out the supply chains for getting essential equipment and treatment, things like ventilators, oxygen masks into Africa, where we're about to see a devastating spread of COVID. There have been philanthropists in India like Nanda Nilekani, Tata Group and so forth that have been doing some very useful philanthropy. Mike Milken and others have been doing a lot of work around the vaccine. And as I say, I think traditionally funding educational institutions, educational research, and particularly medical research has been an area that philanthropic capitalists have focused in. And so there is a chance that they will be the people who help drive the cure. So, for example, this Oxford group that are producing a very, what looks like quite a promising trial around a vaccine, that's all being funded by philanthropists, including Gates, also John Paul Lehman in Brazil, and others. So there's some promising stuff there. But when it comes to race justice and so forth, there's a more patchy record, I think.
I think you go on to a very topical subject with what's happening in the US and in other parts of the world. Matt and I belong to this other WhatsApp group of people in philanthropy as well. And the question I asked was, well, what is philanthropy's response to that? And actually, not many people were coming forward to discuss ideas. I mean, what are you hearing with regards to the role of philanthropy in that kind of situation?
I mean, so there's been some quite interesting stuff that was been ongoing around the criminal justice system, and obviously in America, there's this sort of very disproportionate use of the criminal justice system to basically lock up young black men in particular. And so there's been ongoing work around trying to reform that system that's actually spanned the left, George Soros, and the right, Charles Koch, have actually been in sort of weird alliances to get people out of prison. So that'd be one area. But there are some really, I was talking to someone who advises philanthropists the other day, and they were saying one of the things that amazes them is that you have these historic black colleges like Morehouse that have tiny endowments compared to the Ivy League colleges like Harvard, which have tens of billions of dollars in their endowments. And endowing educational institutions, particularly the high quality ones that have produced so many great leaders over the years, is a no-brainer for philanthropists. So why don't a bunch of philanthropists just give those historic black colleges proper endowments so that they can be competitive with the Ivy League? That would be a kind of easy, no-brainer sort of resource redistribution. And then there's all sorts of things like, I think, a lot of work around employment. I mean, firms have had these huge problems with what they call unconscious bias in recruitment that's held back African Americans and other minorities in recruitment. So even though they have on paper very state-of-the-art diversity policies, that if you actually look at the records, they're very patchy. And I think there's all sorts of things you can do to actually overcome unconscious bias and give proper employment opportunities in the system. So these questions are on the table, and then you get people like Darren Walker at Ford Foundation, who is an African American and very outspoken, saying, look, this time has come to stop just limiting ourselves to giving away 5% of the endowment. We should be doubling down on addressing some of these historic issues now and really kickstarting a systems change that addresses these underlying inequities.
So, all the people that I've been speaking to, I have some relation to education, and that being obviously the best investment people can make. I know that you'll agree with that. What I'm interested in, and I know there's a lot of people on these groups that are from the Philippines, from Nigeria, from Latin America, from the Middle East. A lot of the names that you mentioned are North American or Western European. From your work and background in terms of philanthropy, who are the names that we should be looking out for from these kinds of, places, typically characterized as the global South?
I mean, I think I mentioned already that the Strive Miyasawa in Zimbabwe, who's doing a lot. It's been interesting. The African Union has appointed a number of leading business people, including him and the former CEO of Credit Suisse, and Ngozi Nkwere, who was the former Nigerian finance minister, to really coordinate private sector action around Africa, which has been very promising innovation. If you look at the role of Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, I mean, he has emerged as a major sort of super node in the network of private action around some of the essential medical equipment, which obviously China is a big producer.
Yes.
But he is helping literally other philanthropists and some of the institutions that are involved in care to tell who are the honest players in China. People being surrounded with all these pitches to provide equipment and masks and so forth that you can't tell one company from another, and he's able to provide some navigation role. And I think there are no doubt many others that I, if I did a bit more research, I could give you names on. But I mean, I think I think one of the things that's changed since I wrote Philanthrocapitalism is that it's become a global norm that if you are a super successful business person, you need to have at least pledged a commitment to philanthropy and hopefully done something about it. I mean, obviously, I think in general, the problem I'm observing is that lots of people are saying they're philanthropists and doing a little bit of philanthropy, but far too few are really grabbing it and doing it properly and really being bold and imaginative and taking on big risks. And that's what this crisis challenges them to do. And so we're going to find out whether there's real philanthrocapitalists out there, or whether it's people who are just saying they're philanthropists but basically are playing at it.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today on this live stream. I know there's lots of people who are interested in this area, and I'm sure we will revisit this conversation at a later date. But is there one message about philanthropy that you think everyone should understand? Because the sector has come under pressure recently, that they may not think of.
Yeah, I think the thing about philanthropy is the way it can work is by being really smart, really bold and risk-taking, looking at systems and finding out where the tipping points are, where the blockages are, that a small amount of money can have a disproportionate impact. And so I like to draw a parallel with venture capital. Venture capital, it's relatively small amount of capital compared to the stock market and everything, but it can change things massively. And I think the same could be true of philanthropy, relatively small compared to how much governments spend, for example. But done well, it can be a game changer. Just as not enough philanthropy is done well.
Well, thank you for that insight, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me.